Imagine this scenario. The person you wholeheartedly believed was your soulmate suddenly turns out to be a complete stranger. What if every tender kiss, every whispered promise, every moment shared was just an elaborate performance, a meticulously rehearsed act? Imagine coming face to face with irrefutable proof that the very foundation of your marriage, those sacred vows, the sacrifices made, the entire life you built together, served merely as a pragmatic means to achieve some ultimate goal. For Prince Harry, this chilling nightmare became a harsh reality. He discovered Meghan Markle's secret diary, hidden in the secluded corners of their lavish Montecito mansion. And what he saw on those pages didn't just shatter his heart into a million pieces. It felt as if it ignited and consumed in flames the entire life he thought he knew and understood. Pause for a moment and reflect on this situation. A man gave up everything: his royal status, his homeland, a brilliant military career, even deep and unbreakable ties with his family. He stood up to protect another person from the entire world, from its harsh judgments and constant scrutiny. He turned away from centuries-old traditions and voluntarily embraced exile, all in the name of great love. Now imagine opening a diary and reading a line that pierces you to the core. "I never loved him. I needed the title, not the man." How does one recover from such a shock? Could you ever forgive such a betrayal? Or would you be consumed by such an overwhelming, incinerating rage that the walls around you would tremble with its force? This is precisely the desperate and tragic situation Prince Harry found himself in. The world has long speculated about Meghan's true intentions. Was she genuinely in love with Harry, this young man who grew up in the shadow of his legendary mother, Princess Diana? Or was she more captivated by the glittering crown that once hovered over his head, symbolizing power and status? Tabloids published one version of events, full of drama and sensationalism. Her defenders, conversely, insisted on a completely different picture. But for the first time, according to what Harry discovered, Meghan herself left no room for conjecture or speculation. She confessed it, not in an interview, not in a public speech, but in the solitude of her own handwriting, on the pages of a personal diary. And it is this circumstance that makes everything even more devastating and unbearable. But here's what truly becomes chilling and frightening. Meghan didn't just hint at her ambitions. She didn't merely imply that fame and notoriety played a role in her choice. She laid it all out with cold, calculating precision, as if she were drafting a business plan or a legal contract, rather than writing about her marriage and her feelings. And when Harry read these words, everything he thought he knew about his wife, his children, and his future collapsed. In an instant, like a house of cards. However, it's worth pausing for a moment to ask yourself, what would your reaction be? Would you immediately unleash a torrent of accusations upon her? Or perhaps, would you choose to conceal the diary, waiting for the perfect moment to deliver a decisive blow? Or would you simply sit in a daze, allowing the caustic words to slowly permeate your heart until breathing became impossible? For Harry, there were no delays, no patience, and no chances for rectification. Rage erupted like lightning. It was this instant decision that forever altered not only his family life, but also the destiny of Archie and Lilibet. Why does this story hold such particular significance now? It's not merely about a marriage falling apart. It's about a betrayal of such profound depth that it extends far beyond the relationship between two individuals. It concerns royal lineage, the fragile reputation of the monarchy, and the global obsession with power, fame, and legacy. When Harry and Meghan decided to step back from their royal duties, they portrayed themselves as victims of an outdated, archaic system. They claimed their union was founded on deep love, and that they stood united against the world. But if Meghan's diary entries are to be believed, the truth was far darker. This was not a battle of love against the crown. It was sophisticated manipulation against devotion, ambition at odds with self-sacrifice, a meticulously planned game where Harry was merely an unwitting pawn. Imagine the cozy Montecito home Harry once genuinely considered his safe haven. Sunlight pouring generously through vast windows, and the faint echo of children's laughter somewhere in the distance. The illusion of a perfect world. Now, Imagine the deafening silence that fell when he turned the first page of that diary. Every creak of the old floorboards, every measured tick of the clock, every gentle rustle of the California breeze transformed into a roaring din. For when one reads words capable of tearing the very fabric of their existence to shreds, the entire world seems to stand still. It was in this tragic moment that Harry realized he wasn't just betrayed. He was coldly used. And let's not naively assume this is the first time the world has witnessed ambition cleverly disguised as passionate love. Human history abounds with examples of individuals who reached pinnacles of power by skillfully aligning themselves with the right partner. Kings, queens, mighty emperors, dazzling celebrities. The stage is always set. The actors play their roles flawlessly, while behind the scenes, the true, authentic truth remains hidden. But what makes this particular story so shocking is the striking contrast between Harry's unwavering loyalty and Meghan's calculating, detached coldness. He gave her his entire world. She, in her own words, wrote that she only needed that world, not the man, but merely a platform to achieve her goals. Consider the astonishing irony. Harry once publicly declared to the entire world that Meghan was the one, his soulmate from their very first meeting. He introduced her to his closest friends, his family, and then to all of humanity as the true love of his life. He spoke ecstatically about her inner radiance, her boundless compassion, her unyielding spirit. However, it is alleged that behind tightly closed doors, she confided something entirely different to paper. Her love was never directed at him personally. It was aimed at what he symbolized: the ancient monarchy, the majestic crown, the status of a global icon that inevitably accompanies marriage to a prince. And now, dear listeners, allow me to pose a question that requires contemplation. Do you believe in random coincidences, in the hand of blind fate? Was it pure chance that Meghan's fame skyrocketed precisely when she joined her destiny with Harry's? Was it a mere coincidence that Netflix contracts, book deals, and numerous public appearances showered upon her, as if from a horn of plenty, as soon as she added the esteemed title of Duchess of Sussex to her name? Or was all of this part of a meticulously devised strategy, formulated long before they exchanged their wedding vows? The diary, it seems, points to the latter, and Harry's rage in this context was an entirely inevitable and logical consequence. It's important to emphasize that Harry is not one to make hasty, ill-considered decisions. He has spent his entire life under the unblinking eye of the public, under the merciless gaze of millions. He knows full well what it means to be judged, criticized, torn apart by ruthless tabloids. Yet, when it came to Meghan, he invariably chose her side, speaking out against his brother, against his father, against the very institution that raised and shaped him. But when your partner states in writing that they never loved you, that once unbreakable loyalty shatters like fragile glass, and Harry, clearly, was not going to let those sharp shards continue to wound his soul. So, what happens next? This is the question on everyone's minds and hearts today. Because if Harry truly expelled Meghan from Montecito, taking Archie and Lilibet with him, this is no longer just a trivial marital spat, no ordinary disagreement. It is, in essence, an exile within an exile. It's a betrayal that has transformed into a full-blown war. And the diary, in this instance, serves as irrefutable evidence that no PR team, no meticulously planned interview, no tearful documentary can erase. Once you commit words to paper with a pen, truth or falsehood becomes permanent, etched forever. And Harry is left holding this testament to his wife's coldest and most ruthless admission. However, it is precisely here that the tension, like a string, begins to stretch to its breaking point. Harry was not quick to share his discovery with the world. He didn't rush to hand these incriminating pages to journalists, nor did he call hasty press conferences to expose his wife. No, his initial, furious reaction was intensely personal, primal, and instantaneous. Rage, pure anger, pain of such incredible force that it permeated him to the point of trembling. And it was in this state of emotional upheaval that he took action. He made a decision that Meghan likely never could have foreseen. For sometimes treachery doesn't end with quiet, bitter tears. It concludes with the resounding slam of a door, forever tearing apart a once united family. And this brings us to the climax of the drama. To the moment when Harry, still clutching the diary tightly in his hand, came face to face with the harsh truth. His marriage was nothing more than a meticulously staged scene. It was the instant he realized that the woman for whom he had sacrificed so much never truly belonged to him. And as Meghan's footsteps, suitcase in hand, echoed down the impeccably marbled corridor of their Montecito home, reality crashed down on him like a thunderclap. Harry's world, as he knew it, crumbled overnight. But what he didn't yet know was that the final page of this ominous diary held an even darker secret. A secret capable of not just shattering his marital union, but shaking the monarchy itself to its very foundations. For sometimes the most insidious betrayals are not those that grace the front pages of newspapers. They hide at the very end of the narrative. It all began with something unremarkably mundane. And it's this circumstance that lends an even more chilling undertone to the entire story. Treachery doesn't always arrive with fireworks, with overt warning signs, or deafening alarm sirens. Sometimes it quietly and subtly infiltrates your life, precisely when you least expect it. For Harry, it wasn't a tumultuous scandal, or shouts that revealed the bitter truth. It was merely a simple, everyday gesture. He reached for a desk drawer. Picture the scene. Montecito. A California morning, generous sunlight streaming through tall windows, bathing the polished hardwood floors in a golden glow. A silence hangs in the house, almost unsettling. Meghan is absent, perhaps engrossed in one of her endless phone calls with PR teams, stylists, or consultants. Archie and Lilibet are playing carefree in the garden under the nanny's watchful eye. Their laughter is barely audible from somewhere in the distance, and Harry, feeling his usual inner restlessness, enters Meghan's study. He isn't looking for anything specific. Perhaps he needs a pen, or a notepad, or maybe he's just trying to occupy himself in a room that always felt more like her private office than a full-fledged part of their shared home. Suddenly, amidst his routine tasks, his hand brushed against something entirely unexpected. It was an antique leather-bound book, cleverly disguised beneath a formidable stack of official documents. Its cover, though smooth to the touch, bore distinct marks of time and frequent use, betraying an item that had clearly been opened and closed countless times. There were no flashy titles or elaborate embellishments on it, just a modest, dark binding, from which an inexplicable, almost palpable aura of deep secrecy seemed to emanate. The question arose, would one succumb to the temptation to pick it up? Would irresistible curiosity overcome them? Or would they choose to respect the invisible line that separates genuine trust from an unceremonious invasion of personal space? For the vast majority of people, the latter option would probably be more acceptable. However, for Harry, whose natural instincts had been honed to a razor's edge and tempered by long years of betrayals endured, cunning manipulations, and the constant, relentless intrusion of a prying press into his life, simple curiosity had long ceased to be just that. It had transformed into something vital, a tool for survival. Without further hesitation, he carefully extracted the book from its hidden sanctuary. For a moment, he simply held it in his palms, feeling its significant weight, its imposing heft, as if the object carried an intangible yet palpable burden of something exceptionally important. The faint scent of leather mingled with subtle hints of ink and a woman's perfume, an unusually intimate combination that made the book feel like a living entity in his hands. He paused, indecisive. In his chest, his heart pounded with double force, beating a frantic rhythm. A tormenting question hung in the air. Should he open it, breaching an invisible boundary? Truly, it was a million-dollar question, wasn't it? What would any person do upon discovering their life partner's personal diary? Would they immediately close it, pretending they had never seen it? Or would they dare to turn the first page, fully aware that everything revealed to their eyes could irrevocably alter their familiar world? Harry, finally, made his decision. He carefully turned the first page. The handwriting that met his gaze was unmistakably hers. It was Meghan's distinctive flowing script, at once elegant and filled with inner resolve, as if every word she penned aimed to leave an indelible impression. His eyes skimmed the first few lines, subconsciously expecting to see familiar reflections on their children, or perhaps her deep frustration with the relentless and intrusive tabloid attention. What he read, however, was a blow like a sharp knife plunging directly into his heart. I never loved him. 5 words. Just 5 simple words. 5 words that, in an instant, shattered a man who had already endured so much loss. He blinked frantically, trying to convince himself that he had simply made a mistake, misinterpreted what was written. His eyes scanned the same line again, the very same words, with the same merciless, chilling precision. It was all-consuming disbelief, burning rage, utter bewilderment, that crushing blow to the gut after which your ears ring and your hands involuntarily tremble. Despite his inner protest and the voice of reason, he couldn't stop. He continued to read, turning page after page, and it was then, within the depths of those handwritten lines, that the diary slowly began to reveal its true, dark essence. This was by no means a diary of tender love notes or profound personal reflections. It did not serve as a place for recording gratitude or momentous, life-altering events. No, this artifact was something far colder, imbued with a different meaning. It read like a strategic journal, a personal manifesto, a meticulously crafted plan of ambition. Meghan's words did not breathe with genuine tenderness. They were steeped in chilling calculation. I need him to get the crown. Not the man, just the title, one entry declared, laying bare her true motives. These were the words that served as a revelation, from which Harry's blood ran cold. It was difficult to even fathom the extent of such cynicism. To the world, Meghan cultivated the image of a fairy tale romance, filled with passion and devotion. To Harry, she whispered tender words about fate and destiny, about their union being predetermined. And yet, in the solitude of her diary, she reduced everything to its stark, naked essence. Not love, but purely gain. Not devotion, but a coldly calculated opportunity. Harry slammed the book shut, his chest heaving in a tormented rhythm. For a moment, he stood petrified in the study, his gaze fixed on the diary, as if it might burst into flames in his hands at any instant. Thoughts swirled chaotically in his mind. Could this truly be real? Could the woman he so desperately defended against the entire world, the woman for whom he sacrificed his royal life, actually have written these words, full of ruthless calculation? He sank into Meghan's chair, the diary lying open before him, and Harry couldn't resist the temptation. Slowly, as if hypnotized, he opened it again, turning page after page. Each new entry delivered a blow stronger than the last. She wrote about their engagement, how perfect their public appearances were, how the world was captivatingly charmed by their union. She described the wedding not with warmth or intimacy, but with the icy detachment of someone coolly analyzing a shrewd PR move. She even mentioned Diana, reflecting on how comparisons to her mother-in-law could elevate her to unprecedented heights of fame. Harry's hands trembled. His breathing became ragged and rapid. The man who had desperately fought for Meghan, who had abandoned centuries of tradition for her, who had stood on stages tirelessly proclaiming his love, now stared at irrefutable proof that it had all been nothing more than an artfully woven lie. But what was even more heartbreaking, truly soul-shattering, Meghan wrote about Archie and Lilibet not as children she loved tenderly and boundlessly, but as symbols of a legacy that served to bolster her global platform. How must it feel for a father to read such a thing? The thought that his own children, his flesh and blood, had been turned into soulless tools in someone else's ruthless game, was unbearable. Harry slammed the diary onto the table, his face deathly pale, his eyes blazing. A storm of rage and profound grief raged within him. This was not merely a betrayal of trust. It concerned his family, his children, his very essence, which, as it turned out, was being used as a prop in a play he hadn't even known existed. What would a man do in Harry's shoes? Would he immediately confront her, diary in hand, demanding answers? Or would he retreat, trying to process the unbearable weight of what he had just read? Harry didn't retreat. Not this time. He picked up the diary again, and his trembling fingers turned the page, unveiling the next part of the narrative. Somewhere deep inside, he felt that this was far from over, that these first lines were not an end, but merely a prelude to a revelation that could change everything. And he was right, because on the very next page, Meghan's words contained a confession even more chilling than the last. It was this phrase, this single line, that transformed Harry's initial shock into a raging fury. Yet her words about status weren't the most devastating. What followed was darker, sharper, and more ruthless than anything he could have imagined. I never loved him. 5 words. Cold, cutting, irrevocably changing everything. Words like these don't just sting, they echo. They ricochet inside the skull until they're louder than one's own heartbeat. For Harry, reading that line was like a lightning strike. In an instant, everything he thought he knew about his marriage crumbled to dust. He sat, clutching the diary tightly in his trembling hands, desperately trying to convince himself it wasn't true. Perhaps it was a misunderstanding. Perhaps Meghan was writing in some fictional voice, journaling as a character, venting after an argument. Anything but the horrifying truth written in ink right before him. But denial is so fragile, isn't it? When the evidence lies before you, denial can only hold out until the dam breaks. And the dam broke. He read the line again, this time slower, each word pressing heavier on his chest. I never loved him. Can you imagine what it means to realize that every kiss you thought was full of love was, in her mind, just a performance? Every tender word rehearsed, every public display of affection carefully orchestrated. He had given his heart, and she had secretly written that she never wanted it. Her true feelings, it turned out, were quite different. Prince Harry, delving into the past, vividly recalled the moment he first introduced Meghan to his close friends. He remembered the sparkle in her eyes, the seemingly genuine warmth that radiated from her smile. But now, under the weight of what he'd read in the diary, a tormenting question arose. Was it a genuine expression of feeling, or, as the entries hinted, a meticulously planned performance? His memory dutifully brought back images of late nights when Meghan gently comforted him, chasing away his panic attacks. He saw her squeezing his hand tightly during tumultuous and scandalous interviews, quietly whispering words of encouragement, assuring him they would get through everything together. But here, too, doubt permeated every detail. Was this whisper dictated by genuine love, or did it merely serve as a tool to maintain a necessary illusion until her own goals were achieved? As he delved deeper into the pages, the truth, like a fog, dissipated, revealing a ruthless clarity. It became evident that Meghan's diary was not a repository of girlish dreams or intimate, tender feelings. No, it was a meticulously crafted strategy journal, a ruthless blueprint. And in this grand, cold strategy, Prince. Harry was by no means the hero of a romantic saga. He was merely a tool, a stepping stone, the very ladder by which one could ascend to desired heights. One of the pages pierced his heart especially sharply, leaving a deep, painful mark. There, in Meghan's calligraphic hand, was inscribed, Harry believes this is destiny. For me, it's an opportunity. He represents everything I wanted. Visibility, access, legacy. I don't love him the way he thinks I do, but I need him. Imagine the weight and coldness of these words. Let them sink deeply into your mind. Not, I want him, which might suggest attraction. Not, I cherish him, which would indicate affection and tenderness, but specifically, I need him. This phrasing, devoid of any warmth or sincerity, unmistakably reveals the language of someone who perceives another person, not as an object of love and partnership, but as a functional object, a tool to achieve their own, sometimes mercenary, goals, as a resource to be used and then discarded. Imagine yourself in the prince's shoes. Ask yourself this sharp, piercing question. If you suddenly discovered that your closest partner had written such lines about you, how would you react to such a betrayal? Would you succumb to the crushing blow, withdrawing into oppressive silence? Or conversely, would you confront them face to face, unleashing the accumulated storm of rage and indignation? Or perhaps you would simply walk away forever, regardless of the cost, regardless of the losses. For Prince Harry, as it became clear, the path of silence was completely unacceptable. An indomitable rage was already churning and building in his chest. However, before it came to an inevitable confrontation, a profound, all-consuming internal collapse occurred. His mind, like a broken mechanism, began frantically sifting through all past memories, replaying in minute detail every smile, every kiss, every joint public appearance, but now through entirely different, awakened eyes, seeing only pretense and calculation. Even that sacred day at the altar in St. George's Chapel, when they exchanged vows, now appeared in a different light. What was she thinking in that solemn moment? Of him, her groom, or of the countless cameras broadcasting their union to the entire world? He recalled the moment when, looking at her, he sincerely uttered, "You look stunning." And her reply, a quiet whisper, "Thank you." But what exactly was she thankful for? For his boundless love, or for the symbolic crown she was about to wear? And right there, in the depths of this pain, lay the cruelest irony of fate. Prince Harry had always, since childhood, harbored a panicked fear of a tragic history repeating itself. He genuinely worried that Meghan might suffer the same sad fate as his mother, Princess Diana, hounded by a ruthless press, destroyed by relentless public scrutiny. However, this diary revealed a horrifying truth. Meghan was not Diana the victim. She was Diana the brand, a cold and calculated project, a brand she not only wanted to emulate but sought to surpass, using every means available. To surpass. In a chilling passage, capable of freezing blood in one's veins, she laid out her thoughts. Diana was adored, but she didn't know how to monetize her fame. I will. Can you imagine Harry's face when these words, like sharp daggers, pierced his consciousness? His mother, the woman he idolized, whose tragic demise haunted him every day of his existence, was reduced to a mere stepping stone in Meghan's grand and meticulously planned scheme. This comparison carried not an ounce of reverence. It was an open challenge, a declaration of rivalry. Tears streamed from his eyes, but these were not quiet, mournful tears of sorrow. They were hot, scalding, filled with rage, almost venomous in their bitterness. Betrayal has the horrifying ability to draw out the deepest, most primal rage from the very depths of one's soul. And for Harry, this was not just a betrayal of marital vows, it was a sacrilegious betrayal of his mother's sacred memory. He slammed the diary shut, his breathing ragged and uneven, but some relentless curiosity, or perhaps even masochism, drove him back to those pages. He opened it again, desperately searching for some contradiction, some line that might offer even a faint glimmer of hope. But instead, he found only more fuel for the fire raging within him. Meghan described the engagement as nothing more than a meticulously planned PR move. Our engagement story captivated the world. The way he proposed was romantic for him, but for me, it was the perfect picture, a true fairy tale for the press. Harry's stomach twisted with pain, the words blurred before his eyes. The proposal, into which he had poured all his sincerity, all his soul, was to her nothing more than a catchy headline, a tool for achieving global adoration. He turned another page, and new revelations unfolded before him. The wedding definitively cemented my status. It wasn't about vows. It was about visibility. Millions watched, billions commented. That's a power you can't buy. Sacred vows, unbreakable promises, the tears that glistened in his eyes as he uttered the cherished, "I do." All of it was reduced to a contemptible tool in Meghan's ruthless career. Have you ever felt shamelessly used? Perhaps it was a friend who only called when they desperately needed something. Perhaps a boss who praised your work but never valued you as an individual, as a person. Multiply that feeling by 1,000, and you might begin to remotely grasp the level of devastation Harry felt at that very moment. And yet, in the pages of that diary, Meghan felt not the slightest shame. She was neither bewildered nor confused. Her words were not written with guilt or remorse. They were written with unmasked pride. She genuinely believed she had played the game and achieved an undeniable victory. Harry's fists clenched until his knuckles were white. His jaw tightened, betraying his inner tension. His jaw tightened. However, there was a certain catch here, truly astonishing in its cynicism. The diary the prince held was not just a cold compilation of thoughts. It proved surprisingly detailed, even excessively so. Meghan, it turned out, meticulously, step by step, recorded her ambitions, as if drawing up a detailed business plan to achieve specific goals. Every stage of her relationship with Harry, be it their first meeting, the solemn engagement, the lavish wedding, or the birth of their children, was presented by her solely as a stage on the path to gaining global influence. And if such a revelation was not enough to shake him to his core, Meghan allowed herself an even crueler comparison, pitting Harry against other men. "Harry isn't the most influential man I could have married," one entry read. "But he is the most useful. His personal story, his past traumas, the image of his late mother, all of it makes him incredibly marketable. He can give me what no one else could. That's global attention. Useful. Marketable." Imagine the unspeakable feeling that overtakes a husband reading such words. He is not loved, not cherished, not even respected. He is merely useful. Harry's chest constricted with unbearable pain. A wave of nausea swept over him, as if his insides were twisted into a tight knot. He wanted to scream, to unleash all his pain, but the thick walls of the Montecito mansion seemed to silently absorb his desperate cry, turning it into voiceless suffering. And then his gaze fell on a line that, in an instant, changed absolutely everything. A line that not only pushed Harry beyond despair, but plunged him into an abyss of furious rage. Because Meghan didn't just write that she never loved him. She frankly confessed who she truly loved instead of him. And this shocking confession did not concern Harry. It had nothing to do with their children. It didn't even touch the monarchy as a whole. It was dedicated to something far more dangerous and sinister. But even this was not the most devastating revelation the diary held. Because Meghan's true confession of love, what she, in her own words, could never resist, still awaited him on the next page. And when Harry finally read those words, his blood ran colder than ever before, as if an icy current flowed through his veins. What do people truly seek in life? Some, perhaps, would say it's love. Others, happiness. For Meghan, at least according to her own diary, it wasn't love. It wasn't even happiness in the usual sense. It was status, an insatiable hunger for power, universal recognition. She didn't need a man as such. She needed the monarchy as a tool to achieve her goals. And as Harry, with trembling hands, turned those pages, the obsession literally leaped off the page, like flames, mercilessly burning away all the illusions he had once harbored about this woman. One entry, in particular, stood out among the others, striking in its frankness and resolve. Meghan wrote it in large, confident handwriting, as if carving her words into stone. "Titles are everything. Without a title, there is no platform. Without a platform, there is no power. And without power, there is no Meghan." Meghan! Prince Harry, immersed in reading, literally froze in place. For him, royal titles had always represented a heavy burden, a kind of shackles, binding his freedom. All his conscious life he had sought to break free from the suffocating oppression imposed by the status of a prince. However, for Meghan, this title was not a curse. On the contrary, it was perceived as a coveted prize. What, in his own words, bound him hand and foot, was precisely what she passionately desired. At this moment, a natural question arises. Can a marriage withstand the test when one spouse sees the crown as chains, and the other as sparkling diamonds? Such a situation hardly speaks of love. Rather, it is a harbinger of an inevitable collision, merely awaiting its hour. Harry's thoughts involuntarily drifted back to the day they first broached the subject of titles. He distinctly remembered Meghan assuring him that royal titles held no meaning for her, that she only needed him. In her words then, there was a sincere conviction that she would be perfectly happy leading a quiet and measured life, calmly raising their children together. However, the diary he held in his hands told a completely different, much darker story, full of hidden motives. Harry believes that fleeing the palace is finding freedom. For me, it's merely a limitation. A duchess has the ability to command an audience, to attract attention. A wife, stripped of her title, becomes just one of many other women. These words crashed down on him like a powerful hammer, making him ponder the profound meaning they held for their entire escape to freedom narrative. The whole world was convinced that Harry and Meghan had left the UK to protect themselves, to live away from the dazzling glare of the monarchy. But if Meghan's diary entries were to be believed, her true indignation was not caused by the fact of belonging to the royal family itself, but by the loss of the high status inextricably linked to it. This is where the main irony of the entire situation lies. Meghan meticulously crafted her public image around the idea of a woman completely indifferent to titles. She positioned herself as an independent individual, a rebellious bride who consciously rejected royal life to live genuinely, authentically. However, in her private life, hidden from prying eyes, she was literally obsessed with the very thing she publicly rejected. This blatant contradiction caused Harry a bout of profound nausea. The situation worsened with each passage read. In another entry, Meghan described in great detail how she viewed titles not only for herself, but for their children. Archie and Lilibet must absolutely bear royal titles. Without them, their future will be limited. They are not just my children. They are an extension of the legacy I am diligently building. Their names, their photos, their titles, all of it is tools. Simply tools. She called her own children tools. One can only imagine how Harry's heart must have shattered at that moment. His children, for Meghan, were not just Archie and Lilibet. They were not simply a son and a daughter. They had become bargaining chips, part of a meticulously crafted brand strategy. At this point, one wants everyone to consider, what kind of mother could write that her children are tools? How could Harry read these words and not feel physically sick? The boy who had lost his mother so young, who vowed to protect his own children from the cruelty of fame, now faced the shocking realization that his wife saw their children not as precious lives to cherish, but as assets to be effectively utilized. Harry slammed the diary shut again, his hands visibly trembling from the surge of emotions. The inscribed pages, however, seemed to haunt him, insistently luring him back, demanding immediate perusal. And so, yielding to this internal impulse, he opened it again. There, among the personal entries, he discovered Meghan's profound reflections on her first month spent within the British royal family. She wrote frankly about her disappointment, caused by the rigid framework of protocol, but not because of its restrictive nature per se. No, her true discontent lay in the fact that these strict rules prevented her from moving forward at her desired pace. They want me to follow. I want to lead. The crown is slow, old, unhurried. I am fast, ambitious, modern. Harry doesn't see this. He thinks we are breaking free. I know we are just beginning. Just consider these words. While Harry genuinely believed he was helping them both find freedom, Meghan, in turn, saw it as the launch of her own grand campaign. His idea of freedom was, for her, merely a foundation for further achievements. Two absolutely opposing visions, each inexorably moving towards an inevitable collision. Harry's head spun with the realization of these revelations. He vividly recalled the long nights they discussed their departure from the UK, their late-night conversations about seeking privacy, about wanting to forge their own independent path. But now, reading her personal, private words, he suddenly understood that Meghan had never desired peace and quiet. She craved fame, global recognition. Their escape was not the end of a chapter for her, but rather, her own brand-new beginning. And this was the most terrifying aspect of these entries. Meghan wrote not merely about desiring status or position. She frankly discussed the urgent need to be above everyone else. She compared herself to other members of the royal family, to established celebrities, and even to Harry himself. "I will not be in the shadows. Not William, not Kate, not Harry. The world needs to see me. I will not settle for just being his wife. I will be the story." Harry's eyes widened in shock. She didn't just want to be part of the general narrative. She aimed to own it, to fully control it, to dominate it. And suddenly, all the interviews, all the documentaries, all the PR deals they had made, took on a whole new, sinister meaning. They weren't about sharing her truth or telling their story. They were about ensuring the world's attention never left her, that she always remained in the spotlight. Listeners, let me ask you a question. Have you ever met someone who absolutely couldn't stand to be in the background? Who always needed attention, recognition, the glare of the spotlight? Now just imagine being married to such a person, with the whole world closely watching your every move, every gesture. This wasn't just a marital union. It was a ticking time bomb, ready to explode at any moment. Harry's anger only intensified as he continued to read those lines. Meghan wrote about Hollywood with the same fervent passion she had previously discussed the royal family. For her, the monarchy was by no means an ultimate goal, or the pinnacle of ambition. Rather, it seemed merely a springboard, a launching pad for something greater. "The royal family gave me fame," her words read. "Hollywood will give me immortality." Immortality. It was this word that pierced Harry to his core, making his blood run cold, for it ruthlessly exposed the true nature of her aspirations. It was not about love, not about family, and not even about simple human happiness. It was all just a way to etch her own name into the annals of history at any cost, regardless of the consequences. And what was most cruel in this revelation? Meghan made no secret of her emotional detachment from Harry in these pages. She openly, without equivocation, admitted it. "Harry is emotional, vulnerable, traumatized," she wrote. "He loves too deeply. That makes him easy to control. His loyalty blinds him. He will always protect me, no matter what I write here." This particular line wounded him more than any other, for it contained a bitter truth. He had indeed always and unfailingly protected her, from his family, from the relentless press, from the entire world. And now, he realized with horror that she didn't just know this. She counted on it, built her plans upon it. Harry's face burned red as he reread these words again and again, trying to comprehend them. The man who perceived himself as her reliable support and loyal companion was reduced to the role of a mere shield. In her eyes, he saw not a life partner, but merely a means of protection. Not a loving husband, but an impersonal tool to achieve her goals. And yet, despite the pain, Harry couldn't stop turning the diary pages. Deep inside, he felt an irresistible urge to get to the bottom of it, to understand how far her ambitions went. The answer was not long in coming. Meghan desired more than just status or recognition. She sought to become something greater than the monarchy itself, to surpass it. She mentioned Diana again, but this time her words were infused with venom. "Diana was loved because she challenged them," the entry read. "I will be worshipped because I will eclipse them." Harry dropped the diary, his chest heaving, his thoughts racing feverishly. To eclipse Diana, his own mother, the woman he still grieved for every day. This was not merely Meghan's desire for high status. It was an aspiration to cast down the very memory of his mother, to erase her legacy. This realization utterly broke him. But the diary was not yet finished. There was something more. The next page revealed not only status. It exposed Meghan's most dangerous obsession. An obsession that extended far beyond Harry, beyond the monarchy, and into an area that would shake him to the very core of his being. However, Meghan's pursuit of special status wasn't the only blow that struck the prince. Turning the next page, Harry encountered something far more horrifying. These weren't just ambitions, not merely a craving for position, but a true vow. A vow to surpass Diana herself. To Harry, his mother, Princess Diana, was more than just a parent. She was the embodiment of a myth, a symbol, an unhealing wound that still echoed in every corner of his existence. Her incredible compassion, her daring rebellion against tradition, her unimaginable tragedy, all of it was an integral part of his life. And Meghan, undoubtedly, knew this from the very beginning. She was perfectly aware of the profound significance of Diana to Harry. Therefore, when the prince turned yet another page of the diary and saw Diana's name, scrawled in Meghan's handwriting, it literally took his breath away. He braced himself, hoping to read words of reverence, sincere admiration, perhaps even deep sorrow. But what appeared before his eyes was entirely different. Diana was adored, but I will be worshipped. Worshipped? That word pierced Harry's chest like a sharp shard of ice, causing acute pain. His mother had been a victim of the ruthless press, a woman destroyed by the very attention Meghan, by her own words, so deeply hated. And yet, in Meghan's eyes, Princess Diana was not a warning, not a lesson to be learned. She was perceived as a benchmark, a challenge that needed not just to be met, but to be surpassed. Esteemed readers, let me ask you a question. How would you feel if your spouse wrote about competing with the ghost of your deceased mother? Would you feel sick, acutely betrayed, a rage beyond words? Because those were precisely the feelings that overwhelmed Harry at that very moment, robbing him of the ability to breathe. The diary did not end with this shocking revelation. Meghan continued to compare herself to Diana in detail. She described how Diana's fashion choices, her active humanitarian work, and even her tragic death created a legacy of worldwide adoration. And then she wrote something that made Harry's hands tremble uncontrollably. Diana didn't know how to use the fame she was given. I will. She evoked sympathy. I will evoke devotion. She was loved. I will be untouchable. Untouchable. That word finally broke Harry's composure. His mother had been hunted, pursued, driven into a Parisian tunnel where she took her last breath. Untouchable was the last thing Diana ever was. And here, Meghan was turning his mother's pain into a kind of competition, into a ladder by which she intended to climb higher than anyone before her. Harry forcefully pushed the diary away, his chest heaving convulsively with emotion. He nervously paced the room, his mind a tempest of conflicting thoughts and feelings. Princess Diana, his mother, had always remained a sacred symbol to him, an unshakable ideal. It was her image that had been the driving force prompting Harry to fight. For true love, for personal freedom, and for the inviolability of family ties. And now Meghan, his own wife, dared to declare in the pages of her diary that Diana's memory would not be a source of inspiration for her, but merely a convenient stepping stone from which she intended to rise and completely overshadow the late princess's legacy. One only needs to ponder this paradox. In front of the whole world, Meghan had repeatedly spoken of Diana with deep reverence and awe. In numerous interviews, she discussed how Diana would undoubtedly have supported her, how strongly she felt a spiritual connection to her late mother-in-law's fight for justice and recognition. The public readily believed that Meghan embodied the very spirit of the Princess of Wales. Yet, in the solitude of her private life, in the merciless honesty of a personal diary, Meghan did not seek to embody Diana. On the contrary, she waged an unspoken competition with her, striving to surpass her. For Harry, such a revelation was not merely an act of betrayal. It felt like true sacrilege, a desecration of something sacred. At that moment, painful memories of his own childhood flooded Harry. Before his mind's eye appeared a 12-year-old boy walking behind his mother's coffin, under the blinding flashes of cameras, under the scrutinizing gaze of the entire world. He strained to hold back the rising tears, and deep within his soul, in the silent stillness of his heart, he had then made a vow. Never again. Never again would he allow the woman he loved to be destroyed in such a cruel and merciless way as his mother, Princess Diana, had been destroyed. And now, years later, Meghan's words, etched on paper, mercilessly turned that sacred vow into a bitter mockery. The reason was simple and terrible. Meghan was not afraid of being destroyed. On the contrary, She was determined to rise to such heights as Diana had never reached. Consumed by inner agony, Harry sank back into his chair, pulling the diary close as if trying to force it to refute its own words, to prove his terrible conclusion wrong. However, each subsequent line only plunged the knife deeper into his tormented heart. Harry carries her grief. I carry her opportunity. Where she fell, I will rise. These words sounded like a verdict. He whispered them aloud, full of bewilderment and despair, as if hoping that speaking them would make them less real, less terrifying. But the sound of his own voice only amplified the full weight of the realization. And then came, perhaps, the most destructive passage of the entire diary. Diana became the people's princess, but I will become the people's queen, even without a crown. The repetition of the phrase "people's queen" echoed in his mind, filled with cruel irony. Meghan, it turned out, openly admitted that she didn't need the physical crown of the monarchy to achieve her ambitious goals. She only needed Diana's rich legacy, a powerful public platform, and, of course, Harry's name. To her, the man sitting across from her at the dinner table was neither a loving husband nor an equal partner. He was merely a functional bridge leading to the immortality that Diana had already achieved. How could he coexist under the same roof with someone capable of such fabrications? With someone who not only showed no respect for her legacy, but openly declared her intention to surpass her? Harry abruptly slammed the diary shut. His chest heaved heavily, each breath difficult, and his gaze was clouded with furious despair and profound sorrow. For years, he had been tormented by the obsessive thought that Meghan was perceived by the public as a kind of new Diana. He tirelessly protected her from such parallels, insisting that Meghan was a self-sufficient individual, and that his mother's memory remained inviolable. But now he realized with horror. Meghan herself was not just condoning these comparisons, but actively fueling them, cultivating them, and ultimately turning them into a tool to achieve her own ends. And the scale of this treachery only grew, because Meghan didn't just aim to be more significant than Diana. She wanted to achieve this by rewriting the very history that shaped Diana's tragic fate. She died a victim. I will live a victor. His hand visibly trembled as his gaze scanned these damning lines. Victim. Victor. These words, like poisonous arrows, pierced his consciousness, causing unbearable pain. In his perception, his mother was not a helpless victim of circumstances. She appeared as a martyr, a valiant warrior who fell in an unequal battle against powerful forces beyond her control. Meghan, on the other hand, reduced her image to a cautionary tale, designed only to highlight her own triumphant ascent. It was at this critical moment that Harry's deep emotional pain transformed into scorching rage. It was a powerful, thunderous anger, unlike anything he had felt in years. Because this was not just a treacherous act, it was sacrilege. It was a desecration of the cherished memory of the only person Harry had grieved for daily, throughout his conscious life. And here lay the bitter irony of the situation. Harry had married Meghan, sincerely believing that she was a kindred spirit to his late mother, that she could understand the pain Diana had endured, and that she would cherish and respect her legacy. Yet here, in black and white, Meghan openly declared that she not only sought to pay tribute to Diana, but overtly intended to surpass her, to eclipse her brilliance. And still, Harry couldn't stop reading. He desperately needed to understand how deeply rooted this destructive idea was. The last line of this chapter in the diary finally dispelled all doubts and confirmed his worst fears. I will be remembered longer than Diana. Harry may not see it yet, but one day the world will. This was the end. The final straw that broke his patience, completely shattering the remnants of his emotional equilibrium. Harry felt his chest tighten with unbearable pain, his stomach churn, and his fists clench until his knuckles turned white, betraying his inner tension. Meghan had betrayed not only him personally, she had betrayed Diana's cherished memory. She had trampled upon the very legacy, the very memory that had served as an unwavering guide throughout his life, and such monstrous perfidy demanded immediate and decisive confrontation. Prince Harry, diary in hand, rose from his seat, his footsteps echoing on the floor, announcing his exit from the study. Unstoppable fury raged in his veins. His world, it seemed, had collapsed in an instant, in mere minutes. But Meghan, his wife, was not yet aware of his discovery. She had no idea that her carefully hidden writings had undermined the very foundations of their marriage. And as Harry swiftly headed for the door, ready to confront the woman who had audaciously declared her intention to eclipse Diana, his anger reached its climax. For what was about to happen was not just an ordinary conversation, or a settling of scores. It was a true turning point, a decisive point of no return. A moment when Harry would demand exhaustive answers. A moment when Meghan's mask would be ruthlessly torn off, revealing her true face. A moment when their entire marriage seemed to hang by the thinnest thread, ready to snap at any instant. However, when Harry finally confronted Meghan, what he heard from her lips was neither an apology nor even a denial. It was something significantly darker, something that would forever change everything, turning their lives upside down. The diary was still clutched in his hands when Harry, driven by blind fury, found her. His grip was so tight that the old diary's leather cover visibly bent under his strained fingers. His footsteps echoed through the spacious Montecito mansion, but it was not the calm, peaceful stride of a husband seeking his wife, but rather the thunderous, resolute march of a man heading into an irreconcilable war. Each step was heavy, sharp, imbued with the burning, unstoppable rage that consumed his soul. Meghan was in the kitchen at that moment. The gurgling of an expensive espresso machine filled the air, and the aroma of freshly brewed, invigorating coffee streamed in the bright sunlight filtering through the windows. She looked up, startled slightly, as Harry abruptly appeared in the doorway. Her face lit up with her usual, practiced smile, but that smile instantly faltered and faded when she saw the object he held in his hands. The diary. For a moment, absolute silence reigned in the kitchen. A silence so dense and oppressive that it felt suffocating. Harry's voice broke the oppressive quiet, low and rough, trembling with suppressed rage. "What is this?" He forcefully threw the diary onto the cold marble countertop, the sound of the impact splitting the room like a sharp whip crack. Meghan flinched, her hand frozen in the air above her coffee cup. "Harry," she began softly, her tone carefully measured, as if choosing each word. "That's personal. Personal." That single word spoken by her broke something inside him, severed the last thread of patience. "Personal? Personal?" His voice rapidly rose, and years of suppressed anger, accumulated within, now erupted in a powerful torrent. "You wrote that you never loved me. You wrote that I was just a title to you, just a stepping stone to something greater. Do you have any idea what it's like to read that?" Meghan's eyes darted quickly to the diary, then back to him. Her lips parted slightly, as if to speak, but no words came out. For the first time in her life, the actress, accustomed to any role, had no ready lines. Prince Harry leaned in, his features contorted by unbearable pain and burning rage. His voice, filled with bitterness and despair, questioned, "Was any of it real? Our wedding, those sacred vows, the nights you whispered words of love, was it all just an elaborate lie?" Meghan swallowed hard, and her agonizing silence, like a mute witness, silently confirmed his worst fears. Finally, Meghan broke the oppressive silence, her voice calm but chillingly detached. "Harry, you just don't understand," she uttered. In response to these words, full of arrogant disdain, his fists slammed against the countertop with a dull thud, expressing a silent storm of indignation. "Don't you dare tell me I don't understand!" His strained reply rang out. "I saw it with my own eyes, read those lines. You dared to compare yourself to my mother. You stated you would surpass Diana. Do you realize what that means to me? Do you understand the pain that causes?" At that moment, Meghan's flawless mask cracked, and a flash of undisguised irritation flickered in her eyes. "I was just letting out my emotions," she tried to justify. "It was purely personal. Doesn't everyone write things in a diary they don't really mean?" Prince Harry shook his head, involuntary tears welling in his eyes, reflecting the depth of his disappointment. "Don't insult me with such pathetic excuses," he said, his voice trembling with suppressed indignation. "Those weren't just the words of someone pouring out their emotions. No, those were carefully crafted phrases of someone coldly and calculatingly making plans. You called our own children tools. You called me merely useful. That's not an emotional outburst, Meghan. That's the true essence of your nature." The atmosphere in the room intensified, becoming almost suffocating. Meghan crossed her arms, her previously unruffled composure slowly but surely beginning to falter. "You have no idea what it's like to be me," she exclaimed, a hint of resentment in her voice. "Constantly judged, perpetually doubted. This diary was my only outlet, my way to finally take control of my own narrative, to define my story." Harry's voice, full of bitterness, broke. "Take control by writing that you never loved me? By promising to become greater than my mother?" In response to his words, her eyes hardened, and any softness, if it had ever been present, vanished without a trace, replaced by cold, unyielding steel. "You must think Diana was perfect?" she asked sharply, challenging his perception. "Not at all. She played the media skillfully, Harry. She was keenly aware of the power of the spotlight. All I did was acknowledge that undeniable truth. In this world you can't survive by being meek and unnoticed. Only those who know how to get seen survive." It was at this moment that the final, irreversible breaking point occurred. Harry recoiled as if struck a powerful physical blow. "Don't you dare compare yourself to her!" he cried, his voice full of rage and despair. "Don't you dare pervert her sacred legacy into a cynical justification for your own betrayal." His voice dropped to a low rumble. Trembling with unbearable grief. "She died because of that attention. And you? You greedily chase it, as if it's the only thing of any value in life." For a moment, Meghan paused her reply, as if weighing each word. Then she gave a subtle shrug, and in her voice, cold and sharp, came a final, disarming admission. "Perhaps it is." And so it was. Prince Harry's chest heaved as if he had just run a marathon. He looked at her, and his gaze held complete bewilderment, as if a complete stranger stood before him. The woman he had once considered his wife, the one he had vowed to protect, seemed to have vanished into thin air. Or perhaps her true face had never revealed itself until this moment. "Do you realize what you're saying?" he whispered, barely suppressing the tremor in his voice. "You're admitting this right here, right now." In response, she stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Her voice now sounded sharp, stripped of all pretense and carefully constructed facade. "What if it's true? What if I really did marry you for the platform, for the high status, for the coveted crown?" she retorted, her tone cold and calculated. "Do you think I could have reached such heights without you? Would anyone even care who Meghan Markle was without Harry?" Her words hit him like a barrage of bullets, piercing through him. His fists slammed against the marble countertop again, making it shudder. Harry's voice broke into a desperate, wrenching roar, and tears streamed freely down his face, unchecked. "I sacrificed everything for you," he choked out through his sobs. "My family, my country, my military career, my home. And you just stood there, smiling, secretly documenting every moment, knowing it was all a lie." Meghan didn't flinch. She stood straight, her posture almost defiant, unyielding. "And yet, here we are," she replied calmly. "You gave all that up because you chose to. Don't you dare blame me for your own choices." Silence fell again in the room. But it wasn't the silence of confusion or bewilderment. It was the deafening silence of a marriage torn in two, finally and irrevocably. Harry's eyes locked onto hers, and in that moment, for the first time, he wasn't pleading. He wasn't trying to defend himself. He wasn't even trying to fix anything. He was just done. "You need to leave," he said in a low, firm, final voice that brooked no argument. Meghan blinked, blindsided by this unexpected resolve. "What?" "You heard me perfectly. Get out." Her jaw instantly tightened, betraying rising tension. "This is my home too." Harry slowly shook his head in complete disagreement. "Not anymore. Archie and Lilibet are staying with me. You're done." Meghan's carefully maintained composure fractured. The accustomed calm vanished, replaced first by shock, then by unbridled fury. "You can't do this!" "I already have." They stood staring at each other across the cold marble countertop. The journal still lay between them, like a newly detonated bomb, its shrapnel scattered everywhere. Harry's chest heaved. Meghan's eyes burned with an intense fire, and the silence hanging between them screamed louder than any words. After this decisive declaration, Harry spun around sharply. He picked up the ill-fated journal, clutching it tightly under his arm, and strode towards the stairs, his steps firm and purposeful. His final words, spoken with such unwavering certainty, reverberated in the silent room. "I will not let you use me anymore, and I will not let you use our children." Meghan remained standing, frozen, her face deathly pale, contorted by a mixture of fury and profound disbelief. She had never seen him like this before, never heard words from him spoken with such absolute finality. And as Harry disappeared from view, ascending the stairs, Meghan's forgotten, untouched coffee cup slowly cooled in the morning sun. Only the ragged sound of her own heavy breathing filled the room. In that moment, like an icy shower, the realization hit her. The game she had so carefully constructed was inexorably slipping from her grasp. However, Harry did not yet know the full depth of what was to come. This agonizing confrontation, full of bitter revelations, was merely a precursor. For what followed went far beyond mere anger or fleeting annoyance. It was a decisive action, an unequivocal expulsion. The hour was approaching when Meghan would be forced to leave the comfortable confines of Montecito, taking with her only a suitcase and the ruins of her former hopes. The illusion of their shared life, carefully constructed and guarded, was now shattered forever, its fragments irrevocably scattered. But when Harry, keeping his word, firmly ordered Meghan to leave, her response, the desperate and unexpected move she made, proved to be something entirely unforeseen even by him. The words he had spoken earlier still hung in the air, like wisps of acrid smoke, a reminder of the decision's inevitability. "You need to leave," Harry had said once, and its echo lingered. His voice was calm yet unyielding, and every word conveyed the absolute gravity of his intentions. Meghan's thoughts fluttered wildly, like trapped birds. Throughout her years in public life, she had faced countless attacks, caustic press criticism, sensational and often false headlines, a string of high-profile scandals, and even outright undisguised hostility from the powerful British establishment. Yet none of it compared to what was happening now. Never before had Harry stood against her, never become her adversary. For years she had unreservedly relied on his unwavering loyalty, his almost blind devotion, which seemed unbreakable. He had always, without exception, defended her, always chosen her, prioritizing her interests above anyone else's. But now the unthinkable had happened, what had seemed utterly impossible. He had finally chosen himself, his principles, his own truth. The enormous Montecito mansion, usually filled with a carefully calibrated calm and an atmosphere of refined luxury, had suddenly transformed, becoming a silent yet tense battlefield. The coffee machine seemed to hiss in the background not just incidentally, but like an ominous warning, foreshadowing something irreversible. The untouched, long-cooled coffee on the table served as a somber symbol of the upheaval, and Meghan's chest heaved as she desperately tried to comprehend the categorical command that had just been issued. "You're not serious," she finally breathed out, her voice barely trembling, interweaving the finest threads of rage and a profound, paralyzing fear. Harry slowly turned to her, and his eyes burned with such fierce resolve as Meghan had never seen before. "Absolutely serious," he said, each word etched with cold steel. "I will not allow you to stay here one day longer." These merciless words, like a hammer blow, shattered her fragile composure, stripping her of all restraint. Meghan's face flushed crimson, and her lips twisted into a grimace of despair and fury. "You can't decide this," she shrieked, her voice rising to an almost scream. "This is our home, our life, our family. You can't just erase me from all of this just because you didn't like what you read." Harry's fist slammed against the doorframe, uncontrollable rage surging within his chest. "Don't you dare twist what was said. Don't you dare portray me as irrational, as if my feelings are unfounded. It was you, Meghan, who wrote those words. You committed to paper the admission that you never truly loved me. You yourself stated that my identity was merely a title, an empty designation to you, and our children were nothing more than tools to achieve your goals. You dared to write that my mother's legacy was something to be surpassed, not honored. Those weren't my words, no. Those were your own thoughts, your deepest convictions. And now you will fully experience the consequences of your revelations." She attempted a laugh, but the sound was false, hollow, and devoid of sincerity. "You must be exaggerating the significance of what was written. It's just a journal, a private sanctuary for venting emotions. Don't you know how many women sometimes write things they don't mean when they're overwhelmed by frustration or anger?" Harry, meanwhile, closed the distance, stepping closer to her, and his voice dropped low, sounding ominous and dangerous. This was not mere annoyance or fleeting irritation. This was a meticulously crafted plan. Every word was deliberate and calculated down to the last detail. You weren't venting emotions. You were confessing, revealing your true intentions. For the first time in a very long time, Meghan felt cornered, stripped of her usual defenses. There were no ubiquitous cameras, no accommodating PR team, no sympathetic interviewer ready to twist the narrative in her favor. There were only her, Harry, and the merciless truth she could no longer conceal. And then came words she was utterly unprepared for. "Pack your bags," Harry said, his voice even, devoid of any waver, and utterly resolute. "You're leaving tonight." Her breath hitched in shock. "What about Archie and Lilibet?" she whispered faintly. "They are staying with me," he retorted sharply and unequivocally. "I will not allow you to drag them into your obsession with status and ambition. They deserve a far better future than to be mere props in your play." This declaration wounded her deeply, piercing her to the core. Meghan's eyes widened, and her usually impeccable composure began to visibly falter. "You can't take my children from me!" she almost shrieked. Harry's face contorted with pain, but his resolve remained unbroken. "They are not yours to exploit, Meghan. They are ours, and I will protect them from you if necessary." The ensuing silence was deafening, feeling heavy and all-consuming. Archie's faint laughter drifted in from the garden, innocent and carefree, utterly untouched by the storm brewing inside the house. Harry's heart clenched at the sound, full of childish joy. He remembered his own childhood, how he was just a boy when he lost his mother, Diana. He remembered the vow he made to himself then, to shield his children from the same agony and suffering he had endured. And in that very moment, his mind cleared, gaining absolute clarity. If Meghan could write such terrible things about their own children in her personal journal, she could not be trusted with their upbringing. Her carefully constructed facade, the mask of composure, finally crumbled, and Meghan's voice rose to a piercing tone, full of genuine fear and despair. "Harry, you can't do this. Consider the ramifications of your words. Think about the public backlash. You know what the media will do if this information becomes public knowledge?" Harry decisively dismissed her fears, shaking his head. "I couldn't care less about the press. I don't care about appearances. All I care about is Archie and Lilibet. And I care about no longer living in constant deception." Meghan's voice dropped to a barely audible whisper, a clear note of despair in it. "If you cut me out of their lives, if you separate me from them, I swear, you will regret this." Harry froze instantly. An ominous threat, like a poisonous fog, filled the space between them. He studied her face, trying to find even the slightest echo of the woman he once loved. but all he saw was the embodiment of cold calculation, a desire for absolute control and untamed fury. "Is this who you've become?" His voice came out almost inaudibly, but with bitter reproach. "Threats? Is that all that's left?" Her gaze glittered, but it was not the gleam of tears, but the pure flame of rage. She snatched her mobile phone from the countertop, gripping the device as if it were a lethal weapon. "I'm contacting my lawyers immediately, my entire team. You have no right to simply cut me out of your life." Harry's voice took on a steely edge, becoming more clipped and resolute. "Let her contact anyone she wants, but no action will distort the truth. Nothing will change the content of what you wrote." The tension between them reached its apex, their standoff merciless. They stood frozen, like statues, no one daring to move, no one able to look away. The journal rested on the countertop, between the two irreconcilable parties, like an unseen yet weighty third presence in the room, a silent but eloquent witness to the collapse of their relationship. Finally, Meghan's last vestiges of composure completely abandoned her. She swept past Harry, her heels striking an angry rhythm on the gleaming polished floor, heading upstairs towards their shared bedroom. Harry kept his distance, silently following her. His chest tightened, and his breathing became ragged and uneven. Upstairs, Meghan flung open the doors of the massive wardrobe, frantically tossing elegant dresses and expensive handbags into an open suitcase. The room filled with the sharp sounds of zippers closing and hangers clanging. Harry continued to stand in the doorway, watching intently. His face remained impassive, betraying no emotion. "Take whatever you want." His words were delivered in an icy tone. "But the children, Archie and Lilibet, you will not have." Her head snapped towards him. Her eyes blazed with undisguised fury. "You can't do this to me. I also gave up everything I had for you. My successful career, a comfortable home, invaluable independence. Do you think I'll just accept this? You're clearly mistaken. You're delusional." The cold reproach hung in the air. In response to this accusation, Harry's jaw clenched involuntarily. "You gave up nothing," he said, his voice full of suppressed bitterness. "On the contrary, you traded it. Traded it for a crown, for coveted titles, for me. And when you couldn't get everything you so desperately desired, you immediately turned me into the villain. But I will no longer allow you to use me or our children for your own purposes." The suitcase snapped shut with a sharp, piercing click, breaking the silence. Meghan, whose movements now seemed jerky and uncertain, dragged it towards the door. At that moment, Archie's footsteps echoed in the hallway, and his small voice, full of childish innocence, called out, "Mommy!" Meghan instantly froze. Her blazing fury unexpectedly gave way to something entirely different: panic, a display of profound vulnerability. She spun around sharply, trying to force a smile, and knelt to hug her son. However, Harry, gently but firmly, stepped forward, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Archie, go back to the garden with your sister," Harry said quietly, but resolutely. His voice trembled slightly, betraying an inner turmoil, but his tone remained firm. "Daddy needs to talk to Mommy right now." The boy looked utterly bewildered, glancing from one parent to the other, sensing a tension he was too young to comprehend. Slowly nodding, he shuffled away. Harry's chest ached with pain as he watched his son leave. The last thing he wanted was for the children to witness the dissolution of their family. Meghan's eyes followed Archie's retreating figure intently until he was completely out of sight. Then her gaze snapped back to Harry. "You're making a mistake," she declared, her voice full of menace. "A huge mistake. You will regret this for the rest of your life." In response, Harry's voice erupted into a furious roar. "The only mistake I ever made was believing you loved me." These words stabbed her like a sharp knife. Meghan's face contorted, her composure utterly shattered. She dragged the suitcase down the stairs, her phone buzzing in her hand as she furiously typed messages. Harry followed her, silently, holding the journal, which now felt like a weapon of truth. When she reached the front door, Meghan spun around sharply, her eyes blazing with defiance. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You won't silence me. You won't bury me." Harry stared back, his face pale, but his resolve unwavering. "Then let the world hear," he said, his voice firm. "Let them hear who you truly are, because I will no longer protect you." And with those words, he flung open the door. Sunlight flooded the entryway, casting sharp shadows on the marble floor. Meghan stood frozen, suitcase in hand, her jaw clenched, her eyes locked on him. She expected him to break, to soften, to take back his words. He always had before, but not this time. And so, with a final furious glare, full of irreconcilable defiance, Meghan crossed the threshold. The door closed behind her with the last echo of a dull thud, marking the end of the dramatic scene. A deafening silence enveloped the space as Harry, breathing heavily, leaned against the door. In his hand, like a priceless artifact, the journal was tightly clutched. Outside, Meghan's heels tapped rhythmically down the driveway, and her silhouette dissolved into the dazzling Californian sun. However, this event by no means signified the end. On the contrary, it was merely a prologue to the coming upheavals. The very moment Meghan left the mansion, the outside world stirred, like a disturbed beehive. Neighbors, ever vigilant, immediately noticed what was happening. The press, keen on any sensation, quickly got wind of the incident, and soon the news that Prince Harry had thrown Meghan Markle out of Montecito was about to sweep the globe. Nevertheless, the most astonishing revelation was yet to come. Harry, engrossed in his emotions, had not yet read the final part of the journal. And on those pages lay a revelation so dark and destructive that it would not only doom his marriage to an inevitable collapse, but would also unleash a storm capable of engulfing the monarchy itself. Before Harry could even catch his breath, the diary's final secret awaited revelation, capable of transforming his anger into something far more perilous. The door slammed shut. Meghan was gone. For a brief moment, silence descended upon Montecito, the diary still clutched tightly in Harry's hand, like a cursed relic. But silence never lasts long in the world of monarchy. For at the very moment Meghan's heels clattered down the driveway, whispers began to spread far beyond the mansion's gates. Montecito was no ordinary neighborhood. It was like an aquarium, where every movement was on display. Neighbors exchanged gossip, staff shared observations, and within hours, the world's most insatiable beast, the press, had sunk its teeth into the story. By morning, headlines screamed across tabloids and digital screens. Harry evicts Meghan from Montecito. Royal marriage implodes in California crisis. Archie and Lilibet caught in crossfire. Images, grainy at first, rapidly circulated. Meghan, hastily entering a waiting black SUV. Her sunglasses hid her fury, a phone pressed tightly to her ear. Suitcase wheels rattled behind her, leaving a trail. Harry's absence from these photos spoke volumes, no less eloquently. He didn't chase. He didn't plead. He was done. But it wasn't just the tabloids frothing with rage. News crossed the Atlantic faster than a wildfire. Beyond the gates of Buckingham Palace, aides scurried, phones buzzed, and whispers echoed through the corridors. This wasn't just another royal spat. This was an explosion, capable of changing everything. A quiet explosion. It all began with an event that could only be likened to a deafening explosion, shaking the foundations of the monarchy. King Charles, already worn down by years of rule and the heavy burden of age, was immediately informed of the incident. His face contorted, the deep lines etched by fatigue and worry becoming even more pronounced. Over decades, he had weathered countless royal scandals. Yet this, the news that his younger son was evicting his wife, was something entirely different, something unprecedented, as he muttered to his aides. "It was always heading this way," he added, as if summarizing years of drama. And Prince William, the direct heir to the throne? Once Harry's dearly loved brother, who had gradually become his irreconcilable rival, reportedly showed little surprise. According to palace insiders, upon learning of the incident, William merely shook his head slowly, uttering, "He finally sees it." There was no hint of triumph in his words, no shadow of cruelty. It was merely the resignation of a brother who had tried for years to warn Harry of such an outcome, whose warnings, it turned out, had gone unheeded. Prince Harry had previously faced condemnation and estrangement for his actions, and this episode only confirmed long-held fears. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, was said to have reacted to the news with quiet, profound sadness. "For the children's sake," she whispered to her confidant, her thoughts, as always, first turning to Archie and Lilibet, whose innocence was caught in this maelstrom of betrayal and ambition, becoming unwitting victims of the unfolding drama. Another senior princess, always a direct and outspoken voice of the monarchy, reportedly merely smirked, saying, "We all knew it wouldn't last, and it's for the best. Now it's finally over." Her words carried a sense of relief, mixed with fatalism. Within the walls of the royal palace, a so-called war room was immediately activated. Advisors and the king's inner circle hotly debated how to respond to the inevitable storm already brewing on the horizon. Should they issue an official statement, thus fueling public discussion? Or was it preferable to maintain complete silence, allowing the tabloids to feast on the remains of Harry and Meghan's marriage, gradually exhausting the topic? The decision, as was often the case in such situations, leaned towards silence. However, in this instance, that silence proved far more eloquent and louder than any words. Meanwhile, halfway across the world in California, Prince Harry sat alone in his study. The diary lay open on his desk once more, as if awaiting new entries. Outside, at the very end of the driveway, reporters with cameras had already begun to gather, and in the distance, helicopters circled faintly, their blades slicing through the quiet. The Montecito sanctuary, once a refuge, was no longer so. It had become a stage, and Harry, whether he liked it or not, was at the very center of global attention. Harry didn't shy away from what was happening. He immediately contacted his closest circle, old friends he still trusted, lawyers, advisors, and yes, eventually, the palace itself. His primary goal was to protect Archie and Lilibet. It was the only thing that mattered at that moment, the sole task for which he was prepared to act. It was at this point that the situation took an even more ominous turn. Duchess Meghan, unlike her husband, didn't remain in the shadows, and her actions soon became clear. As soon as the next morning dawned, the information space was filled with leaks, not from Prince Harry, but directly from his wife's side. Meghan's loyal allies, acting discreetly, began sharing information with sympathetic press contacts. Gradually, the general narrative forming around the events began to undergo significant changes. They persistently claimed that Meghan had not been evicted or rejected. On the contrary, she herself had decided to withdraw from the situation. Her departure was presented as a conscious choice to distance herself from a supposedly toxic environment that, they alleged, Prince Harry had created. Thus, in the public eye, Meghan once again appeared as a victim, suffering from circumstances. However, Prince Harry held a powerful trump card, his personal diary. This diary was irrefutable evidence, documenting the true course of events, and Harry was well aware that its contents would sooner or later become public knowledge. He understood. Once the world saw Meghan's personal entries, her own words, containing her cold admission of not loving him, her unbridled obsession with royal titles, and, most shocking of all, her firm intention to eclipse even Princess Diana herself, no meticulously planned information campaign, no attempts at spin, could contain the colossal explosion of public outrage that would inevitably follow. Meanwhile, in the heart of London, senior members of the royal family were in a state of tense anticipation, bracing for the inevitable upheaval. One key question preoccupied them. Would Prince Harry decide to speak publicly? And what would Meghan do? The fragile reputation of the monarchy, already severely undermined by a string of scandals over many years, was once again on the brink of collapse. At the same time, the general public, holding its breath, eagerly devoured every new piece of information. The digital landscape of social media instantly transformed into a true battleground. Hashtags like Team Harry rapidly trended worldwide, with internet users praising the prince for finally seeing the true state of affairs. In response, Team Meghan hashtags immediately countered, claiming Harry was merely slandering his wife to gain public sympathy. Memes mocking both sides of the conflict flooded news feeds. Late-night comedy shows didn't miss the opportunity for biting jokes, and TikTok users reenacted diary excerpts, turning them into dramatic soap opera scenes. It was genuine information chaos, raging on all fronts. Despite all this deafening media noise and public outcry, one question echoed louder than the rest, causing serious concern. What would be the fate of young Archie and Lilibet? Ultimately, the situation wasn't just about Prince Harry and Meghan themselves. At the heart of this raging conflict were two innocent children, unwittingly caught in a brutal tug-of-war between a father desperately trying to protect them, and a mother openly accused of cynically using her own children as pawns in her elaborate game. Anyone with even a slight understanding of royal court intricacies knew well. Custody battles among royal family members never happen quietly or discreetly. They instantly transform into massive wars of reputation, fierce battles of evidence, and, most importantly, relentless wars waged under the watchful and unblinking eye of the entire world. And just when it seemed the wave of scandal had reached its apex and could not possibly grow louder, another, completely unexpected voice entered the fierce struggle. It wasn't another tabloid headline or an official royal aid statement. It was someone much closer to the epicenter of events. One of Meghan's closest friends, a woman who had long tirelessly defended her reputation, who had consistently stood by her side during numerous interviews and public appearances. This friend, now in the ominous shadow of the diary's impending revelation, was prepared to break her silence and speak her truth. And what she ultimately revealed to the world didn't just worsen the situation. It made it 10 times more catastrophic than before. But as Meghan began to face estrangement from her own social circle, when her former associates started confirming that the infamous diary wasn't just a singular misstep, but merely part of a much larger and more unsettling truth, Harry realized that the true ramifications of the situation were only just beginning to unfold. In the world of powerful and public couples, where every step is under intense scrutiny, loyalty is considered the cornerstone of any relationship. At least, that's how Meghan perceived the situation. She meticulously cultivated her social circle, much like a skilled gardener tending to roses, pruning the unnecessary, watering the essential, and tirelessly ensuring that only the most useful, most flattering, and most unconditionally loyal voices remained nearby. However, loyalty, it turned out, is a very fragile flower, especially when subjected to the too bright and merciless spotlight of public attention. And in Meghan's case, this spotlight, unfortunately, became a source of toxicity. When the details of the so-called Montecito collapse became public knowledge, Meghan, it seemed, expected her inner circle to rally around her, providing unconditional protection. And indeed, at first, some did just that. They shared confidential information with sympathetic journalists, skillfully crafting an image of Meghan as a woman trapped in an unhappy marriage, and recounting stories of Harry's volatile temper and extremely fragile ego. However, other members of her circle, those who had been quietly sidelined, those who had long noticed alarming cracks in the impeccable facade, began to show noticeable hesitation. And this hesitation very quickly transformed into uncontrolled leaks of information. The first tangible blow came from a completely unexpected source, an old Hollywood acquaintance. This was not a best friend, not a close confidant, but someone who had known Meghan long before she joined the royal family. Initially, this person unofficially claimed that Meghan's diary was not an anomaly or an accident. According to him, it was entirely consistent with her character. She always kept records, and, as he recounted, she treated her life like a meticulously crafted script. Every step was planned in advance, every relationship perceived as a separate scene in a grand production. The press eagerly seized upon this sensational metaphor, the script. Suddenly, Meghan's entire life was presented to the public not as a spontaneous love story, but as a carefully directed performance. The diary ceased to be seen as a singular emotional outburst. Instead, it became compelling evidence of the very script Meghan had, apparently, been writing for years. However, the real deafening explosion occurred when someone from her innermost circle, someone she called a friend, broke ranks and spoke out. This friend, once one of Meghan's most ardent and unwavering defenders, now whispered words to journalists that instantly spread across the globe. Harry isn't lying. The diary is real. And it's not the first time she's said she doesn't love him. These words spread like wildfire, engulfing all news feeds. Harry sat in Montecito, utterly stunned, watching his phone literally light up with new headlines. For the first time, Meghan's allies were not just trying to defend her. They were actually confirming his truth. His pain, his fury, his anger over the diary's contents were validated by the very people who had, until recently, unconditionally defended her. Silence. However, the flood of revelations did not dry up. Soon, another insider emerged, recounting rather unpleasant details. This source claimed that Meghan regularly discussed Harry's vulnerabilities, characterizing him as easy to handle and predictable. Remarkably, these were the very words Harry had previously discovered in the diary. Could this be a mere coincidence? Hardly. She knew his weaknesses perfectly, the insider explained, shedding light on the situation. And she used them without hesitation. Panic attacks, his deep grief for the lost Diana. None of this served as a reason for Meghan to offer comfort. On the contrary, it became a tool for exploitation. She skillfully turned his pain into her personal gain. As Harry read these lines, his blood literally boiled with indignation. The feeling of betrayal deepened with every new detail. It turned out she not only secretly recorded these thoughts in her diary, but also openly voiced them to her friends. This was no fleeting fit of disappointment, hastily scrawled on paper. No, it was an entire worldview, an ingrained pattern of behavior, a meticulously planned strategy. And the more friends turned away from Meghan, the clearer the true picture of what was happening became. Her carefully constructed image of a victim duchess, a misunderstood woman unfairly wronged by the crown, began to crumble rapidly. In its place, a completely different persona emerged, that of a manipulator, an actress who viewed her marriage as just another role, her children as props for crafting the right image, and her husband merely as a means to achieve her own ambitious goals. But further events gave this drama an even sharper turn. One of Meghan's closest confidants, whose name is well known in Hollywood circles, reportedly confirmed shocking information. It turned out Meghan had spoken about being cooler than Diana, long before the infamous diary was written. She always declared she would rewrite the royal narrative, this friend confessed, revealing her true intentions. She dreamed of being remembered as the one who broke down the monarchy and built her own empire from its ashes. Harry sat in complete silence, processing this second-hand information. His heart was heavy, and his thoughts raced, trying to comprehend what he had heard. Words he had once dismissed as exaggerations recorded in the diary were now being reiterated by others. Friends were confirming the darkest and most ambitious aspects of her nature. And then came, perhaps, the cruelest and most painful twist. Another friend let slip that Meghan had once joked about her marriage to Harry in private conversations. She uttered phrases like, "He's sweet, but he's not CEO material," or, "At least he comes with a title." We laughed, but I don't think she was joking. It was a stab in the back, the friend shared, emphasizing the bitterness of those words. For laughter wounds most deeply precisely when it reveals a bitter truth. And for Harry, the realization that the woman he genuinely loved had joked about reducing his role to merely a title was utterly unbearable. The vindication Harry felt brought him no joy whatsoever. There was not a shred of satisfaction in knowing he was right, in having his worst fears confirmed. Only a deep, consuming grief enveloped his soul. It was a grief stemming from the realization that so many people were aware of what was happening, yet not one of them saw fit to warn him of the impending disaster. His heart ached at the thought of how diligently he had defended Meghan to his family, to his own brother, to the entire world, believing in her sincerity and innocence. The irony was that while he stood by her fiercely, behind closed doors, away from prying eyes, her closest friends were sharing with each other the truth that had eluded him for so long. And yet, these unexpected leaks, appearing seemingly out of nowhere, brought with them a completely unforeseen consequence. They didn't just damage Meghan's reputation, didn't merely undermine her standing. No, Something far more significant happened to Harry. In his soul, which had seemed constrained by months of paralyzing betrayal, a bright, powerful fire suddenly ignited. For the first time in a long while, he stopped feeling like a prisoner of circumstances, a victim of deceit. Instead, he was overcome by a sense of absolute clarity of thought, a newfound strength, and a clear direction for further action. For if even Meghan's own friends were confirming the shocking information he had discovered in that diary, it meant only one thing. He had gained an undeniable advantage. He held the truth in his hands, and now he could finally use it to assert his position. Without delay, Harry reconnected with his lawyers, whose numbers he already knew well. He also called his advisors, preparing for decisive action.